Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now this is by far still one of my favorite Samsung phones since Samsung has ever made, and I think they did a great job with this phone back in 2020. Now this phone has since gotten, I think, one of its last versions of software updates. Hopefully ends up lasting a little bit longer. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see what happens there, but I kind of do think that the S20 Plus was a solid phone. I still think it holds up decently well, and if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones, I'll leave some link down in the description below. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus, this phone on the front had a 6.7-inch dynamic AMOLED display. Now personally, I think this was a really good display that Samsung made. And to be honest, I think a lot of people back in 2020 thought this was probably one of the best panels ever put on a phone in general, and I would 100% agree with that. It was a hole punch display, centered hole punch, which changed from the S10, and it's actually been a little bit more future-proof because of that change. It was a smaller hole punch display as well, curved edges, or the curved glass on the sides, which looked great. And ultimately, this was a really good display. But the biggest change was they brought that 120Hz panel on this phone. They have not, that was a crazy big thing. Before this, there were no 120Hz panels on Samsung devices. So this one was the first Samsung Galaxy S phone to actually bring it. And that was a really big change. Since then, a majority of phones have, and in fact, their Galaxy A14 that just came out has a 90Hz panel, which is pretty crazy. So I love that Samsung did this back then, and this phone brought a lot of capability and a lot of firsts for the Samsung lineup. Now on the bottom, this thing has a USB-C port. They did remove the headphone jack on this phone, but they did keep that microSD card slot. So I was totally okay with that. I think still having a microSD card slot on a phone is amazing, especially with a phone like this back then. This was the most powerful phone you can buy at that moment. And this thing, by having that microSD card slot, made it so much of a better deal than a majority of the manufacturers by that point who already removed it. Now on the back, we had that glass back as well, and it was a pretty good glass back. It was not a frosted glass back, so that's kind of what the more modern approach is today, but I still think it looked pretty good, and there really wasn't too much to complain about in my opinion, at least on the back of this phone. Now on top of that, we had that, kind of quadruple camera setup a little bit on the top left. We had wireless and reverse wireless charging on this phone, which was awesome. We had IP certification on this phone. We had pretty much it all on this phone. This phone was a very premium feeling, flagship type of device. And that is still one of my favorite things about Samsung. For their S lineup, at least for this generation, they really knocked it out of the park. And it was still, even in this day and age, it still feels like a flagship, which is wild. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the camera setup, this phone, like I said, triple camera setup, kind of like a fourth camera too. So 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 64 megapixel telephoto lens, 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, then a 0.3 megapixel depth camera on the back, and on the front it had a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. Now let me kind of say this too. This phone, like I said, it brought the first for 120Hz and some other stuff. This phone also brought the first Samsung phone to bring 8K video capability on the back. Now, it is still overkill in this day and age. I don't think majority of people are filming probably even in 4K, but having 8K on a phone is insane. And this was the first Samsung Galaxy S phone to bring it. Since then, every single Galaxy S phone has had this capability. And the funniest thing is, still to this day, a majority of the competition still shoots in 4K video, which honestly is perfectly fine, but it's so funny just to see how ahead of time this phone was. For example, the Google Pixels still only shoot 4K, and the iPhones still only shoot 4K as well. So this camera was kind of ahead of its time, and it still kind of is, which is so wild. So I will say the camera quality is still very good. You also get 4K at 60 on the front too, which is really nice. And this is still a very good camera. Realistically speaking, no matter what you do on this phone, you're going to have a solid camera. And because this thing was still getting software updates, this thing was also getting those new camera features that came with those One UI updates as well. So the quality of this camera is still good. I still think if you're using Snapchat and Instagram and those applications, it could be a better, experience. But if you're using that stock camera application, you are getting a very solid experience from basically everything that I've seen from this camera, even in this day and age, which is so crazy to think about. So in terms of the camera setup, that kind of covers it up there. Now on top of that, I will add, with the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus software and longevity, we really don't know how long this phone's going to last. I'm pretty sure it's kind of done. One UI 5 may end up being its last version of software. It could end up lasting longer with security updates, but this is going to be the one area where you're going to have to really kind of think about, do you want to get this phone and already have it kind of outdated? I still think you could use a phone like this for like another 2 years and probably be okay, especially since Samsung has been improving in their, software standpoint, especially with security updates. But this is probably going to be the one area you're going to have to really think about. If you're okay with getting a phone like this and kind of having it already kind of on its last version of software, well, it's not a crazy big deal because, like I said, you're still getting security updates and you still got a ton of features built in within this phone as well. But like I said before, you might be better off if you just go ahead and buy like maybe a Galaxy S21 Plus or maybe an S22 Plus in the used market. But other than that, I mean, this is still a very good phone, especially in the hardware sense, that I think you might be okay. You may be able to swing out for like another year or two, but if you plan on keeping this phone for like 5 years, this may not be the phone for you. Now, in the performance segment, this phone has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside of it with 8GB of RAM. So there was only ever one model of the S20 Plus, and I think there's really only one model of most 20 or S Pluses from Samsung. But I will tell you, this is still a very good performing phone for the most part. So I don't really use my S20 Plus that much, but I use my S20 a lot, like all the time. And this is still a fairly powerful phone. This phone, I will say, it had the best chipset like on a phone for 2020, so it didn't really miss out on much. But I think since then, phones have gotten so much faster and so much better that it's actually quite surprising and astonishing of what you can do with a phone nowadays. Now, the basic things like texting and calling, obviously those things are still going to be fine. But even when you go up to those bigger intensive applications, in my opinion, I play a lot of games and most of the time it's a lot of emulators. It is crazy to me seeing the improvement from like a phone like this to the latest generations, especially with those Snapdragon 8 Gen 2s coming out. Those are very good chipsets. So with a phone like this, I guess you're going to be okay depending on what you're doing with it. If you're doing basic apps and not expecting to do too much gaming or anything heavy intensive, perfectly fine. But if you plan on doing some more heavy intensive stuff, do keep in mind that this phone will still be able to run it. I've played a lot of games and a lot of heavy applications on these types of phones, but just know that the newer phones do have, probably a way better chipset than these things, but that doesn't mean this is bad by any means. So keep that in mind. Still a very powerful phone for sure. In the battery life segment, 4500 mAh battery with reverse wireless charging, which is amazing. So you still have a really good sized battery on this phone too. So even in that standpoint, you're really not even missing out on too much either. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is I definitely do think the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus is still worth it. I just don't know if it's worth it in terms of the other options that you already have. So if you look at the S21 Plus, that is a better phone than this thing, and that phone still is going to be getting software updates, and it's still going to be lasting for quite a bit of time. So you may be better off if you honestly just go ahead and buy that phone over the S20 Plus, especially if you can buy an S22 Plus in the used market. A lot of these phones have been going down in the market quite a bit, so you might be better off if you just buy one of those phones. But I will tell you, the Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus is a very solid phone, and I was surprised Samsung made such a good Plus phone at this moment. I thought it was going to cannibalize some of the Ultra sales, but I guess they're doing okay in that standpoint. But in terms of that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.